Welcome to Granny's Justice, a place where secrets are spoken and silence finally ends.
I gave him life. I held his tiny hands when he learned to walk. I stayed awake through fevers, through exams, through every heartbreak. I poured everything I had into making him a good man. To the world, he was my pride, my greatest blessing, the son every mother prayed for.
But blessings can turn into curses, and pride can turn into poison. The day my own son betrayed me was the day my family turned into strangers. Before I begin, tell me, where are you listening from? Type your country and city in the comment box, because betrayal like mine doesn't belong to one place. It can happen anywhere. My name is Eleanor. I am 78 years old, and I live in a quiet little town called Springfield, Illinois, United States. People here know me as the old woman with the rose bushes, the one who still bakes pies for church on Sundays, the one who walks slow but greets everyone she meets. For decades, I wore the badge of mother with pride, and my son, my only son, was the reason I smiled even on my darkest days. When he was little, his first cry filled this house with joy. When he wrapped his tiny hand around my finger, I promised myself I would never let go. I stayed up through his fevers, rocking him against my chest. I waited outside classrooms with nervous hands while he took his first exams. I cheered so loud at his baseball games that the neighbors teased me for weeks. To me, he wasn't just my son. He was my pride, my whole world stitched into one boy, and the people of Springfield saw it too. They'd stop me at the grocery store and say, "Mrs. Eleanor, you must be so proud of that boy." And I was. Every compliment felt like a medal on my chest, because I believed I had raised not just a son, but a good man. Springfield was the kind of town that looked perfect from the outside, where neighbors waved as they passed, and Sunday mornings rang with church bells and potluck laughter. But in towns like these, families weren't just neighbors. They were measured against each other, and mine. People envied us. We had a modest house with white siding and a porch swing that creaked on summer nights. We weren't rich, but we looked happy. My son was polite in public, respectful to his elders, and sharp enough to make teachers nod with approval. At church picnics, he carried old Mrs. Thompson's folding chair, and people whispered, "Eleanor, you raised him right." Those words were fuel. They kept me standing tall, because every mother wants to believe she's done well. And I believed it with my whole heart. He wasn't just my pride. He was my hope. In a town where children often left for bigger cities, he promised me he'd stay. That no matter what, I'd never be alone in my old age. I still remember one evening, clear as glass. He was 17. The sky over Springfield burned with streaks of orange and purple. We sat on the porch swing together. He leaned his head against my shoulder and whispered, "Don't you worry, Mama. One day, I'll give you the life you deserve. You'll never want for anything." Those words melted into my bones like scripture. I carried them everywhere. I thought they were carved in stone, but love blinds you. There were moments, small, almost invisible, when I saw something strange behind his smile, a sharpness in his tone, a flash of anger in his eyes. Once, I found money missing from my purse. He swore it wasn't him, and I believed him, because every mother makes excuses. He's just tired. He's just a teenager. Boys will be boys. I told myself my son could do no wrong, that my pride was proof of his goodness, that love alone was enough to keep him true. Looking back now, I see how carefully I painted the picture of a perfect family. At church, I smiled until my cheeks ached. At gatherings, I bragged about his grades, his manners, his future. I told anyone who would listen that he was my greatest blessing. But the truth was waiting, lurking beneath that picture-perfect frame. And when the illusion shattered, it didn't just break me. It broke the very home I thought was unshakable. I wish I could tell you that unease began with something big, but it didn't. It was small. Tiny cracks in the glass of our life dotted first. They looked harmless, but soon the cracks began to spread. It started with his words. The sharpness, the way he spoke to me, not as a son to a mother, but as if I owed him something. When I asked him where he'd been, he snapped, "Why do you always have to know everything?" The boy who once leaned on my shoulder now pulled away like my touch burned him. Then came the lies. Little ones at first. I was studying. I was with friends. I'll be home early. But the hours didn't match. The stories didn't add up. And a mother knows when the truth is being dressed up to look pretty. One afternoon, I found my purse lighter than it should have been. Money missing. When I asked him, his eyes hardened. "Don't you trust me?" he said. And like a fool, I swallowed my suspicion. Because mothers don't want to believe their sons can steal from them, I told myself. He wouldn't, he couldn't. Not my boy. At church, he still played the part. Helping elders with chairs. Nodding at the pastor. Smiling at neighbors who whispered how proud I must be. But at home, his smile didn't reach his eyes. His laughter didn't sound like joy. It sounded sharp, empty. The distance grew. He stopped sitting on the porch with me at sunset. He stopped telling me about his dreams. He started closing his door more often, and when I knocked, he answered with silence. I told myself it was a phase, that boys grow restless, that teenagers push their mothers away. But deep down, I felt it. The storm gathering, the ground shifting beneath my feet. One night, I caught him staring at me across the table, not with warmth, not with love, but with something I couldn't recognize. It was like a stranger was sitting in my son's chair, a stranger wearing my boy's face. That's when I realized. The cracks weren't small anymore. They were spreading, and one day soon they would shatter everything I thought I knew. This was the beginning of the end. The slow unraveling. The signs I ignored. The warnings I buried, because I wanted so desperately to believe that love could hold my family together. But love alone cannot stop betrayal. It didn't happen all at once. Betrayal rarely does. It creeps in like a shadow at dusk, soft at first, until you realize the sun has completely gone. My son began disappearing. Not physically at first, but in ways only a mother would notice. The boy who once told me everything suddenly had no words for me. When I asked him about school, he shrugged. When I asked him about friends, he snapped, "Why do you care so much?" And then, one evening, he didn't come home at all. I sat on the porch swing until midnight, the chains groaning under my weight, my eyes scanning every streetlight, every passing car. I told myself he was safe, that he'd come walking up the drive any moment. But when the sun broke over Springfield the next morning, his chair at the breakfast table was still empty. He stumbled in just after dawn, reeking of smoke, his shirt stained, his eyes bloodshot. "Where were you?" I asked. My voice was shaken, but soft, like a mother's voice always is when she's trying not to scare her child away. "Out with friends," he muttered, but his eyes told me everything. They weren't the eyes of a boy out laughing with friends. They were the eyes of someone who had seen things he shouldn't, done things he shouldn't, and carried no shame for it. When I pressed him, he snapped, "You don't trust me. Why can't you just let me live?" Then he slammed his bedroom door. That sound, wood crashing against its frame, echoed longer than any church bell. At first it was small, a few bills missing from my purse, then larger amounts from the jar I kept for groceries. I wanted to believe I'd misplaced it, that old age was making me forgetful. But then came the day I opened my jewelry box. The locket my husband gave me on our wedding day gone. The silver bracelet my mother left me gone. I confronted him, tears streaming down my face. These aren't just things. They're my memories, my life. He didn't even flinch. He just looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You don't need them." I do, and that was the first time I realized this wasn't my boy anymore. This was someone else wearing his face. The house no longer felt like mine. The walls I had painted, the floors I had polished, the rooms I had filled with laughter, all of it belonged to a stranger now. He came and went as he pleased, sometimes days at a time. When he returned, he carried with him an air of defiance, a smirk that dared me to question him. Neighbors still praised him. "Eleanor, you must be proud. He's growing into such a fine young man." I smiled, but inside I wanted to scream, if only they knew. If only they could see the monster who ate dinner at my table, then vanished into the night. It was a Sunday afternoon. I had baked a pie for church, my way of keeping life normal, of holding on to what little peace I had left. When I returned home, the door was ajar. My heart sank. I rushed inside, and the sight hit me like a storm. Drawers pulled open, cabinets ransacked, the little safe where I kept my savings empty. I dropped to my knees, my hands trembling. It wasn't just money. It was months of sacrifice. Every penny I had tucked away for bills, for medicine, for survival. And there he was, standing in the doorway, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "Where are you going?" I cried. He didn't answer. He just stared at me, cold and unrecognizing, as if I were a stranger blocking his path. "Please," I begged. "I'm your mother. Don't do this." And all he said was, "You'll be fine." Then he walked out, and with him, he carried the last piece of the illusion I had built. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. In a town like Springfield, secrets travel faster than the wind. People noticed him with the wrong crowd. They saw him in places no good man should be. They watched as the boy they once praised turned into the subject of hushed conversations. But no one said it to my face. They smiled politely at me in the grocery store, while their eyes said everything their mouths didn't. And I carried the shame like it was my own. One night, he came home late again. This time, I was waiting. I stood in the kitchen, the clock ticking louder with every second. When he walked in, I asked the question I had been too afraid to ask. Why? Why are you doing this to me? He smirked, and in that smirk, I saw the full betrayal laid bare. "Because you're weak," he said. "Because you'll never stop me." And that was it. The knife that cut deeper than any theft, any lie, any slammed door. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the things. It was about the bond between us, the bond I thought was unbreakable. And with those words, he severed it. That night, I stopped seeing him as my son. I started seeing him for what he had become. A stranger, a betrayer, the beginning of the end. Asterisk, my house didn't change its walls. The paint didn't peel. The porch swing still creaked. The rose bushes still bloomed red by the fence. But it was no longer home. Every corner whispered his absence. Every creak in the floor reminded me of the nights I sat awake waiting for him. Even the kitchen smelled different, like betrayal leaves behind a scent you can't scrub out. I would walk from room to room, searching for the boy I once raised. But every photograph, every memory, felt like a cruel trick. Because the boy in those pictures was not the man who now carried my name into the dirt. He still came home sometimes. not often. And when he did, it was like a stranger had walked into my kitchen. He'd sit at the table, eat the food I cooked, but not once look me in the eyes. Sometimes I'd ask, "How was your day?" And silence would answer me back. Other times, he'd laugh, not the laughter I remembered, but a hollow, sharp laugh that made my skin crawl. The boy who once leaned on my shoulder now felt like a trespasser under my roof. Family is supposed to stand with you, but betrayal doesn't stop at one person, it spreads. When word reached my relatives, the questions began. Not for him, for me. "What did you do wrong, Eleanor? You must have spoiled him. Maybe if he'd been stricter, he wouldn't have turned out this way." They didn't see his lies. They didn't see the nights I cried myself to sleep. They only saw the broken pieces and blamed me for dropping them. One by one, family gatherings grew colder. I stopped receiving invitations. I stopped hearing from cousins and sisters. And just like that, betrayal turned my son against me and my family too. Springfield is small. Too small to hide from eyes that never stop watching at the grocery store. Neighbors smiled politely, but I could feel their gaze on my back. I could hear the whispers behind the fruit stand. "That's Eleanor's boy. Did you hear what he did? She raised him alone, you know. Maybe that's why. Such a shame. Such a waste." Every step through town felt like walking barefoot on glass. Even the church pew, once my place of peace, felt heavy with judgment. People don't say much to your face in places like these. They don't need to. Their silence is enough. The nights were the worst. I'd lie awake in bed, listening to the empty house breathe. Sometimes he wouldn't come home at all. Other nights, he'd stumble in drunk, banging doors, knocking over chairs, slurring words that cut deeper than knives. I'd sit on the edge of my bed, hands clasped, whispering prayers into the dark. Prayers that felt like they bounced off the ceiling and fell back onto my lap. "Lord, bring my son back to me," I whispered. But the boy I prayed for was already gone. Shame is a cruel companion. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It wraps itself around your throat and tells you not to speak. I carried shame like a second skin. Shame for the son I raised. Shame for the family that abandoned me. Shame for the neighbors who now pitied me. I stopped inviting people over. I stopped answering the phone. I stopped smiling at the grocery store. Because in Springfield, once shame stains your name, it doesn't wash off easy. The final crack in the house came one night when I found him in my bedroom. I woke to the sound of drawers sliding open. My heart raced as I sat up, and there he was, rifling through my things. "My God," I whispered, "what are you doing?" He looked at me with those same cold eyes and said, "Don't act like it matters. You don't need any of this." It wasn't the money this time. It was my trust, my safe place, my last corner of peace. And he stole it without a second thought. After that night, I stopped calling it home. It wasn't mine anymore. It wasn't even his. It was just a shell, a cage where betrayal slept in every corner. I'd walk the halls and whisper, "This isn't my house. This isn't my son. This isn't my life." But the walls didn't answer back. They only echoed one morning. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize myself. The woman staring back had eyes swollen from crying, wrinkles carved deeper from grief, a back bent from carrying too much sorrow. I touched the glass, as if I could reach through and find the woman I used to be. But she was gone. Betrayal doesn't just take from you. It changes you. It makes you a stranger to yourself. That was my life now. A house full of silence. A family turned cold. A town that whispered. And a son who had become a stranger. I thought the cracks were painful. But living in a house of strangers, that was the true breaking point. There comes a point when grief stops being quiet. when the tears dry up, when the prayers turn hollow, and all that's left inside is a storm waiting to break. For me, that day came on a Wednesday evening. The sky over Springfield was heavy with rain. The house smelled of damp wood and dust, and I sat at the kitchen table, staring at an empty plate, realizing I hadn't eaten a full meal in days. I wasn't just hungry for food. I was starving for answers, for dignity, for the son I had lost. And so, when I heard his footsteps on the porch, something inside me snapped. He walked in like he owned the place. No greeting, no glance. Just the smell of smoke and cheap liquor trailing behind him. I studied his face under the kitchen light. The jaw was the same. The eyes were the same. But everything else, the warmth, the boy I raised, the son I loved, was gone. "You're late," I said quietly. He smirked. "What's it to you?" My hands trembled on the table, but my voice didn't break. "I want you to sit down." For a long moment, he just stood there, as if debating whether to laugh in my face. But finally, he dropped into the chair across from me, leaning back with his arms crossed. I looked at him, my chest aching with every beat. "Why are you doing this to me?" He scoffed. "Doing what?" "Stealing, lying, treating me like I'm nothing. I gave you life. I raised you with everything I had, and this is what you give me back." He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing like a blade. "You want the truth. You're weak. You'll never stop me. And everything I take, I deserve it." Those words hit me harder than any slap could. Something inside me, something I had buried under years of love and denial, rose like fire. "No," I said. My voice cracked at first, but then it grew. "No, you don't deserve it. You don't deserve me. You don't deserve this house, this table, this life I gave you." His smirk faltered. For the first time, he looked startled. I slammed my hand on the table. The sound echoed through the kitchen. "You may be my blood, but you are not my son. Not anymore. My son died the day you chose betrayal over love." He exploded out of his chair, his voice filling the house like thunder. "Don't you ever say that to me. You're nothing without me. You're just an old woman with no one left." The walls shook with his anger, but I didn't flinch. I stood, my frail body trembling, yet my voice steady as stone. "You're wrong. I may be alone. I may be old, but I am not nothing, and I will not let you destroy me any longer." For a heartbeat, the house went still. The rain outside slowed. The clock in the hall ticked like a hammer. He stared at me, waiting for me to crumble. But I didn't. I held his gaze until his own eyes flickered away. That was the moment I realized monsters thrive in silence. And the second you raise your voice, you cut their power in half. He grabbed his jacket, rage simmering in his every move. "You'll regret this," he spat. "You'll regret pushing me." I watched him walk out the door, watched the rain swallow him whole, and for the first time in years, I felt a strange calm settle in my chest, because I knew something he didn't. I was done being silent. That night, I picked up the phone. My hands trembled as I dialed, but my voice was clear. When the counselor answered, I whispered, "It's Eleanor. I can't live like this anymore. I need help." And those words, those simple trembling words, were heavier than all my years of silence. The next morning, I opened the curtains wide, let the light in. For too long, my house had lived in shadows. I brewed coffee, sat at the table, and waited. Not for him, not for betrayal, but for the people who would finally listen. And as the first knock came at the door, I whispered to myself, "This is the day it begins. Not the end of my story, but the beginning of my justice." That was the confrontation. The night the storm broke. The night I stopped being his victim and became my own witness. Asterisk, the night after the confrontation, my house was quieter than it had ever been. Not peaceful quiet, not the kind of silence that soothes you, but heavy quiet, the kind that presses down on your chest, making every breath feel borrowed. I sat in my rocking chair, listening to the house breathe without him. The floorboards groaned under their own weight, the walls held their secrets, and the clock in the hallway ticked louder than it ever had before. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for his footsteps. And that absence, that sudden emptiness, cut deeper than his presence ever did. People think betrayal ends with anger. It doesn't. It ends with grief. I grieved as if my son had died, because, in a way, he had. The boy I raised, the boy who once leaned against my shoulder at sunset, was gone. In his place was a man I didn't know, a man who wore my son's face but carried none of his heart. I walked past his empty room, staring at the bed that hadn't been made in months, the posters peeling off the wall, the faint smell of smoke and regret, and I cried. Not for the man he had become, but for the boy he used to be. After the confrontation, word spread quickly. It always does in small towns. Some neighbors avoided me altogether. They couldn't look me in the eyes. Others pretended nothing had happened, their smiles stretched too thin, their words too polished. But behind closed doors, the whispers multiplied. She finally stood up to him. About time. I always knew something wasn't right. Funny, isn't it? How people know everything once it's too late. But none of them came to my door. None of them asked if I was okay. Their silence was its own kind of betrayal. My relatives were worse. Some said you should have kept quiet. Family matters stay in the family. Others whispered, you raised him wrong. This is your fault. As if my love was the crime. As if my devotion was the sin. They didn't see the nights I sat awake, rocking him through fevers. They didn't see the sacrifices I made so he could have shoes on his feet, books in his bag, a chance at a better life. But when it all fell apart, they pointed their fingers at me, the mother who had given everything. Loneliness became my closest companion. I woke up to an empty table, cooked meals that no one came home to eat, folded laundry that never left the basket. I stopped going to church potlucks. I stopped answering the phone. I stopped opening the curtains, because every time I tried to face the world, the shame walked beside me, and I wasn't strong enough yet to walk faster than it. But here's the thing about loneliness. Sit with it long enough, and it teaches you something. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I sat on the porch swing alone. The wood creaked beneath me, the roses swayed in the breeze, and for the first time, I didn't feel empty. I felt angry. Not at myself. Not even at the whispers, but at the injustice of it all. I realized I had survived his betrayal. I had survived my family's cruelty. I had survived the town's silence. And if I could survive all of that, I could survive anything. The next morning, I brewed coffee, pulled out a notebook, and began to write. At first, the words came slow, shaky, uneven, but then they poured out like water breaking through a dam. I wrote everything. The nights of silence, the missing money, the cold stares, the cruel words, the confrontation that split us apart. Each sentence was a stitch, each paragraph a wound beginning to close. I wasn't writing for him. I wasn't writing for the town. I was writing for me, for the woman in the mirror who had forgotten she was more than a mother, more than a victim, more than a shadow of betrayal. That night, I closed my notebook and whispered a promise to myself. I will not let this be the end of me. I will not let his betrayal define my name. I will rise from this, and I will speak so no other mother ever feels this alone again. And for the first time in years, I slept without fear. Not because the pain was gone, but because I had finally chosen to carry it differently. That was the fallout. The grief, the silence, the loneliness. But it was also the beginning of something new. The spark of strength, the promise of survival, because betrayal may break your heart, but it cannot steal your voice. Asterisk. Justice doesn't begin in courtrooms. It begins in whispers the first time you dare to speak the truth out loud. For me, that moment came at church. I hadn't been in months, but one Sunday morning, I ironed my best dress, pinned my silver hair back, and walked into the sanctuary with my head held high. The pews turned. Eyes followed me. Whispers tickled the air. I sat down anyway, because I was done hiding. When the pastor asked if anyone had words to share, I stood. My legs trembled, my voice shook, but I spoke. "My son betrayed me," I said. Gasps rippled through the room. But betrayal will not silence me anymore. I am still here. I am still Eleanor. And in that moment, a weight I had carried for years began to lift. After that day, I found others, women who had lived through different storms, but carried the same scars. Mothers, daughters, wives, survivors. We formed a circle, not to fix each other, but to witness each other. One woman said, "I thought I was the only one." I took her hand and told her, "No, neither of us ever were." That circle became my second family, not of blood, but of truth. And sometimes, truth is the stronger bond. Eventually, justice came on paper. The counselor guided me through it. Forms, statements, reports. At first the words looked cold, but as I signed my name, each page felt like iron being laid between me and him. Orders, restrictions, boundaries he could not cross. They weren't fireworks. They weren't celebration, but they were protection. And for me, protection was justice enough. I'd like to tell you, my son disappeared after that. That justice erased him from my life completely. But betrayal leaves shadows. Sometimes I still see him in the corner of my memory. A little boy with scraped knees and eyes full of dreams. Then the shadow shifts, and I see the man he became. And my heart aches all over again. But now, I don't let the ache silence me. I let it speak. I let it remind me why telling my story matters. When I was younger, I believed legacy was what you passed to your children. A house, a name, a reputation, but now I know legacy is what you pass to the world. And my legacy will not be betrayal. It will be truth. I tell my story not for pity, but for power. Because silence protects monsters, and truth exposes them. Every word I speak is a crack in the cage I once lived in. Every listener who hears me is another witness who can never unhear the truth. So if you are listening to me now, let me tell you this: you are not alone. Your pain may be heavy, your silence may feel endless, but there is a way forward. Your voice is enough, even if it shakes, even if it whispers, even if it only speaks once. Because the moment you speak, you are free. I am Eleanor. I am 78 years old. I live in Springfield, Illinois. I am a mother who gave everything. A woman who was betrayed, but also a survivor who found her voice again. This was my story. This was my justice. And now, it belongs to you too.